Good day. I'm Glenn O'Kray, the moderator of the program Through the Arsenal Gates. I'd like to welcome you to this program. On this program, I introduce people who have made news, are making history, or will make history. Today, I have a wonderful guest with me, Mona Mawari. Mona and I met last summer at an unusual location outside of Dearborn. Can you believe that? My wife and I were attending a festival in Trenton, and Mona was there and struck up a conversation, and we probably chatted for half an hour, and that was the beginning of our relationship. So, very fine young lady. Mona, tell us where you were born.
Thank you for having me, Glenn. I was born here in the beautiful city of Dearborn at Oakwood Hospital, to be specific.
Very good. And what schools did you attend?
I attended Maple Elementary, and then when I was in third grade, our family moved to Yemen. So I finished my elementary schooling over there in Yemen and all of my middle school. And then I came back and finished a couple of my last years in high school at Dearborn High School. After that, I attended Henry Ford College for my prerequisites for pharmacy school.
And where did you go after Henry Ford?
I went to Wayne State.
Okay.
I attended the Doctor of Pharmacy program over there at Wayne State.
You moved from Dearborn to Yemen to Dearborn again. Compare and contrast.
Oh, okay. So when we moved, most of my family moved. My dad stayed back because he had to operate the family business. And we moved with my mom and my siblings. I was devastated, to be honest, as a child. I didn't want to leave my school, my friends, and I didn't want to leave my dad. I was very close with my dad, and so it was a really sad transition for me at first. When I got to Yemen, I saw a completely different side of the world, and I gotta say it was the most eye-opening experience I've ever had. It's a third world country. Where we lived in the capital. Most of the roads were not paved yet, with the exception of, the major roads. We went to a school that had very little resources. So I remember sitting on a dirty rug in class. We didn't have desks. We didn't have chairs. Very little resources. People had very little, but the community around us was just extremely content and happy with what they had. It was eye-opening for me. I felt like it made me not want to take anything for granted, like all of the opportunities that we have here in the States. It made me think twice before ever complaining about something, or I didn't want to take anything for granted anymore.
Very interesting. Now, were you able to play catch-up without any difficulty, moving from school in Yemen back to Dearborn High?
Yes. So when I got there, I didn't speak Arabic very well. So and I definitely did not know how to read or write in Arabic. So it was a huge learning curve for me. And I remember I failed 5th grade. I had to repeat it. So that was a challenge in itself. When I repeated it, I was at the top of my class, 5th place. And then,
oh, wait a minute, there were only 5 students, though.
No. No, I believe it was a class of about 30 or 40. And ever since I excelled in the language, and ever since then I kept, getting good grades, was the top of my class. And then when I traveled back here, of course over there in Yemen, not too many people spoke English. So I didn't use the language as much anymore. So when I traveled back here, when I was in high school, I had forgotten how to speak English. And so I'm a second generation immigrant, but I feel like I had experienced some of the challenges that first immigrants deal with. And that's, having to learn a new, or in my case, relearn English.
Sure.
Yeah, it was a little confusing. It was a little bit of a culture shock. I feel like I had a huge gap in my vocabulary because, I was in third grade when I left, came back in high school. But eventually, I kept pushing myself and challenging myself, and it all came back to me.
Very good. Now, out of curiosity, did you detect a kind of a different attitude between the teachers here in the U.S. and the teachers in Yemen? Were they supportive of students in Yemen?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
We had some of the best teachers.
All right, great.
Very invested in the students. They would go above and beyond to help the students. The one thing I noticed that was different is being in school here and I can only talk about the period where I was here. It was like mid-'80s, late 80s, early 90s. There was a certain culture in school, the popular kids, the bullies, the kids that were not so popular and were picked on a lot. In Yemen, I didn't experience any of that. It was a completely different culture in the schools. There were no popular kids who went around tormenting other kids, and everyone was in it together. Everyone was supporting each other. That stood out to me very much at a young age.
Very good. So, other than the issue of vocabulary and relearning English, were you up to date with the subjects when you returned to the U.S., or what would you say?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
The
All right, good.
curriculum over there was very strong.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I
Very
did
good.
well in math when I came back. I felt like I was ahead of my peers in science, and I did very
Good,
well.
good. Now, when you returned to Dearborn High, did they have clean rugs?
Even better, they had desks and chairs.
Oh, wonderful. Boy, I tell you, the
Yeah.
Dearborn schools are great.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. So one thing I want to mention is over time, I witnessed Yemen develop more and more as, the longer I stayed there, the longer I lived there. And so eventually we did end up getting desks and chairs. Eventually the roads were paved. Eventually more businesses opened up, and it was beautiful to witness.
Good. Now, tell us about your family.
My parents both live here. My dad is retired. I have an older sister who's a teacher, a middle school teacher. And I have 3 other sisters. I have one brother who is an electrical engineer, works at Ford.
All right, well, tell our audience about your sister, the teacher, and the book she published.
So my sister's name is Salwa Mawari, and she published a book about a little girl named Balqis who lives in Yemen. The scene takes place during the war, and her teacher tells the students that they have an assignment and they need to write, they have a writing assignment. So they need to write an inspiring story for the assignment. Now, Balqis feels like very frustrated because she doesn't understand where she can come up with an inspiring story during some of the most difficult times that they've been living through during the war. She ends up touring the city, the old city of Sana'a, which is an ancient city over 2,500 years old, in hopes of finding some inspiration. I'm really proud of the work that my sister did. She felt like there wasn't enough literature that her students could see themselves in. So she taught ESL students in the past, and she teaches a lot of, new immigrant students, refugees, and she felt like, there's not a lot of literature out there that is inclusive and that they can see themselves in. Because kids, when they look at characters in a book, they feel like, oh, those characters are cool, they're important, and when they are able to see themselves in them, it boosts their confidence and it boosts their, it's empowering for them. And so Selwa wanted to tap into that to be able to connect with her students and to, make sure that there's more. She's passionate about inclusivity in literature, diversity.
Isn't this a wonderful story? But the whole issue of inclusivity is just so very important, and we frequently forget about it in our lives throughout the U.S. Now, Mona, tell us about your mom. What kind of education did she have?
Okay, so I think I'm going to have to paint a small picture about what it was like when she was growing up in Yemen. So Yemen was ruled by the Mutawakkilite family, it was a royal family, for I think from 1918 to 1962, so about 44 years. And they ruled northern Yemen, which is the majority of Yemen. And they kept Yemen isolated from the rest of the world. They overtaxed farmers and didn't use that money to invest back in the people or in schools or in the infrastructure. They held on to most of that money and lived a lavish lifestyle. So yeah, the village that my parents lived in, it's a very poor village. I remember stories of, from my grandma and my mom and my dad saying that about how they would go to sleep hungry, and my grandma would tie her hijab, the scarf, on top of her belly so that she won't feel that hunger. So it was a difficult time. Now, there were no schools, so what they did is the boys were able to learn literacy outdoors under a tree, but that wasn't in our culture back then. It wasn't appropriate for girls to be in that environment. So girls were not allowed to learn literacy. So my mom is illiterate in both English and Arabic. My grandma is illiterate in both English and Arabic. My father never had a formal education. And to be honest, I think it would be safe to assume that anyone around my age from Yemen, who's from the northern parts of Yemen, their parents probably have a very similar story. So yeah, my mom never had an education. She never went to school, not even elementary school. She's always been very timid. Always, she needs help, doing the most basic things like going to see a doctor, and her comfort zone ends at her front doorstep. Yeah. Mind you, she's a very, very kind and generous woman. She's an amazing woman, but she just didn't have, any opportunities growing up, like we do here.
Who was the most influential person in your life growing up?
My father.
Okay.
My father has always inspired me ever since I was a little girl. My father is a very kind, generous, ambitious person. The biggest reason he inspires me is because of his immigration story. And it's a tragic but inspiring one. He was not content with the way things were in his poor village in Yemen. And so back then, because people were living people were living in poverty, so a lot of Yemenis would migrate to other countries in order to work and provide for their families, especially the men. So my dad wanted to leave the village. It was against his mom's will, and he was only 14 years old. So he wanted to leave and go to, the closest country available for him as a kid to migrate to and work at, which was Saudi Arabia. He left there against his mom's will, very determined to just make a better life for himself and his family. Now, my dad has a lot of brothers, and like I said, during that time, a lot of people were migrating to other countries so they can make a living. So a lot of his brothers were residing in other countries. One of his brothers was here in America. Another one was in Britain. Another one was in Sudan. Another one was in another government in Yemen. And so when he immigrated to Saudi Arabia, he would get all these letters from his brothers, checking in on him, because he's the youngest one, and he was only 14 years old. He's a child. What happened is the Saudi royal family intercepted those letters from his family. Oh, and he would get letters also from his mom and dad from the village. They intercepted those letters, and they thought that he was a spy, getting those letters from all over the world.
Wow.
They thought he was a spy for Jamal Abdel Nasser, who was the president of Egypt back then. So they took him, and they interrogated him, they imprisoned him, and they tortured him. And they put him in a prison where, in that prison, that's where they put people who are ultimately get beheaded. So my dad did not think he was going to live. And here's this 14-year-old child who had great ambitions and dreams, wanted a better life, better opportunities. And now he's imprisoned and being tortured, and it was a very traumatizing experience for him. I think he was imprisoned for about 2 years. 2 years. Now, his family didn't hear from him. They didn't know where he was, so they thought he died. And it was, a very difficult experience for his mother especially.
How did he get out of prison?
So, miraculously, 2 years later, they just released him. And it was a miracle because, he was supposed to be beheaded. They didn't, that's what they do to spies. I don't know, I guess someone along the lines realized that he's not really a spy, and they let him go. They let a few prisoners go. So they let him out to the desert, chained, his hands chained, his legs chained. The travel back to Yemen was a long and torturous one. But he went back, reunited with his family, and my dad he doesn't give up. He is very ambitious. He's a little stubborn, and he was like, okay, that didn't work out, so guess I'm immigrating to the United States. And he came to the U.S., and I don't know how one can overcome such a traumatizing experience like that and still have hope. And he's not a bitter person. He's an amazing person. And so he got here. He worked at Chrysler for a while, saved up some money, and then opened up a small business in the South End. It's now called Jum Jum. It's a store in the South End called Jum Jum Family or something like that. He worked there. He managed that for a while, saved up more money, and then sold it, and then opened up the Red Devil restaurant in Detroit on Fenkel back in the day, in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s. A very successful Italian restaurant. The restaurant won multiple awards from food magazines for having the best pizza. And that's my dad. And, he didn't just stop there. He was always working in the empowerment. He was very community oriented. So he worked to empower our community. He worked with Access. I think he sat on the board of Access. during election time, he would go in the South End with a megaphone and, call on folks to go out and vote. That's the kind of person my dad is.
Ladies and gentlemen, doesn't your heart just break when we hear stories of immigrants going through stuff like that, and how anybody can throw stones at immigrants, especially those that are striving to be good citizens? It's just beyond me. Now, when you were 12 years old, what did you think you wanted to do for a living when you grew up?
I've always thought that I wanted to become a doctor. I would always dream about how, I'd be saving lives, and I always thought I was going to be a doctor.
Okay. What advice would you give to an 18-year-old who didn't know what he or she wanted to do for a living?
Immerse yourself with as many professions as possible. I know sometimes we feel like, maybe a few interests, and we'll explore those interests, but I would highly recommend that they explore other avenues that they might even think that they'd be interested in, because you never know. I did a lot of shadowing when I was deciding on what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I reached out to, and people are so supportive. People want to extend a helping hand for, our youngins. They want to guide them. They want to mentor them. So the help is there. We just have to have courage to reach out and try to immerse ourselves in as many, shadowing opportunities as possible.
Okay. What is your philosophy of life?
When I think of my philosophy of life, I am reminded of a quote by Gandhi that says, "Be the change you want to see in the world." I feel like all of us are put on this planet to be change agents. I want to be a positive change agent on this earth. And I feel like you and I, when we look around, we see a lot of things that we're uncomfortable with, we're not content with. And for me, what comes to mind is all the injustices and the inequities that I witness within certain communities around me. And I want to change that. I want to be able to bridge those gaps. I've been working on bridging some of those gaps and inequities on a micro level with individuals, maybe by providing mentorship, maybe by providing a helping hand, or on a macro level by challenging the very systems that exclude certain people and certain communities from participating in the important decision making that impacts them on a daily basis.
Okay. One of the items that you're concerned about in the city charter relates to districts. Would you tell our audience about that?
Yes. So I think everyone should be concerned about districts, or they're also known as wards. Our Dearborn Charter is currently being revised. It happens every 10, 12 years?
12.
Every 12 years. And so this is a chance of a lifetime for us to change our charter to make it more equitable and to make it more fair and to make it inclusive. So we currently in the city of Dearborn have an at-large election system. With at-large election systems, usually what ends up happening is large voter blocks within certain regions of the city dominate, and they basically elect everyone on council or a charter commission. And so we have 7 seats on city council. 6 of those seats are occupied by people who live in the West End, and only 1 of those seats is occupied by someone who lives in the East End. Nobody from the South End is on city council.
Why is it important that somebody represent the South End?
Because if you go around the city, you visit the West End, the East End, and the South End, the differences between certain regions in the city is like day and night. West End is very developed, and it's provides a very comfortable living. The South End, however, has pockets of industry, big pockets of industry in the South End. The South End residents have to deal with air pollution. You know, those industries a lot of times violate the ordinances that they're supposed to abide by. And we've been seeing cancer rates, asthma rates, COPD rates skyrocketing in the South End because of that. Now, air pollution is not the only issue. They also deal with, you know, they have some of the worst roads in the county. They deal with a lot of truck trafficking, which is very disruptive to their daily lives. And this community is not silent. They've been speaking up. They've been demanding changes. They've been speaking up at city council meetings, at commission meetings, at charter commission meetings, and it's just it's not yielded the change that they need. Sometimes minor changes happen, but it's not enough. I would be miserable to live in the South End the way they are living.
All right.
And so the reason it's important for them to have representation is because having someone who lives from the South End, for example, occupy a seat on city council would give them a voice. It would make them involved in, you know, the decision making that impacts them on a daily basis. And it would, you know, they'd have representation by someone who lives in the South End and who is so keen to the issues and concerns that they deal with on a daily basis. They're so, they understand the injustices. They live them every day. And then, you know, compared to someone who maybe lives in the South End, they might not experience they might not be experienced enough to understand the full story going there.
Okay. Mona, we're running out of time. And ladies, I don't think ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we explained the fact that she's a registered pharmacist, a very highly educated person. Mona, tell us what you would like people to say about you when you go to the next life.
Yeah, so I want to be an inspiration for my daughter, for my family. When I leave this world, I want them to feel inspired by what I did, by, you know, the obstacles that I was able to overcome. And I want them to say, well, Grandma did it, whether, you know, maybe it's my grandkids in the future, I don't know. Grandma was able to do it. She was able to overcome those obstacles, so will I. I can do it too. That's what my father was to me, that he was that inspiration to me, and I hope I'm that inspiration to others.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed this interview with Mona Mawari. She's a wonderful person. She's not timid. If you enjoyed this program, tell all your friends and relatives. If you didn't enjoy it, just keep it to yourself. Thank you.